Welcome back to Quest for 2. Today I want to talk about what seems to be a growing trend in Lorcana competitive deck building. Playing one-offs. And by one-offs, I obviously mean playing a single copy of a given card in your deck. This trend most recently came to the fore at the end of the fabled metagame, with Frank Karsten winning DLC Milwaukee with his Purple Steel list that plays a whole host of 1 and 2-offs, Meta Mim, Palace Guard, Timothy Q Mouse, just to name a few. If it was just one player in one tournament with one deck, then maybe you could call it a flash in the pan, a bit of creative deck building. But it seems this trend has caught on. With the recent host of tournaments for set 10 core constructed, there are a whole bunch of top performing lists that all play one-offs across various deck archetypes and one-offs of various sorts, as you can see on screen. But why is this significant? Well, that's because it goes against the conventional wisdom of competitive deck building. You try to avoid playing one-offs because you want your deck to be as consistent as possible. Let's think about it. The most consistent a deck can be is if I play 15 different 4-offs, right? Well, if I decide to play a single one-off, that means one of the cards that I was originally playing 4-off now becomes 3, which means that I'm less likely to draw it. And if I'm playing that card, then it's something that I ideally want to see more often in a game, right? Furthermore, if I'm only playing a single copy of a given card, I'm not very likely to see it over the course of a given game, maybe once every 2 games. In that case, why even bother? Why shouldn't I play more copies of it if it's something that I want to see in my deck? So by playing more one-offs, I dilute the consistency of my deck. And the more one-offs that I play, the less consistent my deck becomes because I won't as frequently or as reliably draw the cards that I want. Just scroll through Reddit and look at posts where people ask for deck building advice, and this is pretty much the first piece of advice that people give. Cut all the 1 and 2-offs, play as many 4-offs as possible to increase the deck's consistency. Playing as many 4-offs as possible is a deck building adage that is as vaunted as only playing 60 cards in your deck, for the same reason. But despite this conventional wisdom, a lot of top players seem to be playing 1-offs in the deck, so there must be something good about it, right? And that brings us to the topic of today's video. Why and when should you play one-offs in your deck? Having looked through a lot of recent core constructed deck lists, I think I've come with a few good reasons why and when we should consider adopting one-offs when we build our decks. So let's go through them. But before I go any further, I want to address what you're obviously thinking. The answer to the question as to why we should play any one-offs is the same as why we should play any 2, 3 or 4-offs. It's just math. It's just probability based on how often we want to see a given card in a given game. Well, yes and no. So yes, in that the more often we want to see a card, the more copies we should play of it, and that boils down to just math and probability. But at the same time, we can only play cards as discrete units. We can only play 1, 2, 3 or 4 copies of a card. We can't optimize fully based on probability by playing 1.5 copies of a card or say 0.7 of a card. So I think trying to understand the trend of why people are playing 1 copy of a card, a one-off, the bare minimum that you can play of a card in a Lorcana deck, is still something worth exploring. Further, it's not like every single time we build a Lorcana deck to jam some games, we're pulling out the hypergeometric calculator and doing calculations for every single decision. We rely on heuristics, we rely on instincts, we rely on just picking a certain number of a card, trying it, playtesting with it, seeing if it works and adjusting from there. As such, trying to understand why certain top players have arrived at picking one-offs is still something worth exploring. In other words, this video still has value, so please keep watching, thanks. Reason number 1, ratios. In other words, to change the ratio of a certain set of cards in your deck so that you can more accurately select your odds of drawing it in a given game. I know I said that we wouldn't talk about math, but this will be quite simple, I promise. So the easiest way to illustrate how ratios work is to use an example from a Sapphire Emerald deck. So I've selected one here by James Burton, who finished 2nd place at the recent Wakefield CCQ. One-off in question is the single copy of One Jump Ahead. Why did he play it? Well, long-time players of such Sapphire Emerald decks know that if you miss your ramp on turn 2, either playing Tipo or Sail the Azurite Sea, then you lose, on play or on draw. So, using a hypergeometric calculator and a bit of probability calculations, assuming you mulligan away your entire hand to find a piece of ramp, which you should do by the way, if you only play 8 pieces, 4 Tipos and 4 Sails, then you're 91.34% to draw ramp on the play on turn 2 and 92.67% on the draw, which is pretty good, but not foolproof. That's, slightly less than 1 in 10 games where you're going to miss ramp. As an aside, these numbers do not include any further draw effects that you may be able to play on turn 1, such as develop your brain, and that will also change the altar and therefore changes the math, as the list that I'm looking at does not play develop your brain. If you want a more in-depth look at the math, Frank Carsten wrote a great article on the math behind altering to find ramp, taking into account playing develop your brain, which I've linked in the description of this video. So, back to One Jump Ahead. By playing just an additional single copy of One Jump Ahead, our odds of hitting ramp on turn 2 improved to 93.81% on the play and 94.88% on the draw, which pushes it pretty close to 1 in every 16 or 17 games where we will miss. It's a marked improvement, and given the importance of ramping on turn 2, that's why the single copy of One Jump Ahead is played as a one-off. But why just play one copy? Why not play 2 copies of One Jump? Well, the benefit of playing additional copies yields diminishing mathematical returns, as you can see from the table. The percentage points gained by playing 2 copies over 1 is less than the points you would have gained playing 1 copy over none, and that continues to be true for the 3rd and 4th copies as well. Add on the fact that One Jump Ahead is typically a terrible draw in the later turns of the game as it's not inkable and it doesn't do anything, then we can understand why people are playing only 1 copy. It's about finding that balance between increasing the probability as high as you can and also making sure your deck still functions, hence ratios. But this logic applies beyond just RAM decks, it applies to all sorts of other decks as well. So for example, say you're playing some kind of deck that wants to curve out with a character on turns 1 and 2, there might be a mathematically good number of 1 drops and 2 drops that you want to play in your deck so that you maximize your chances of hitting it on the correct early turn, 1 and 2, but also minimize your chances of drawing it later on where they're less effective. Say for example, you want 9 1-drops, so you play 4 copies of one, 4 of another, and then a one-off additional 1-drop, so you hit your ratio. Or maybe there's a good number of a certain effect that you want to play. Say for example, in a purple steel deck, you want 5 removal actions. You play 4 Strength of the Raging Fire and 1 He Held His Thunderbolt, so the Thunderbolt's the one-off. Or maybe say in your Emerald Sapphire list, you want to play 5 effects that bounce effectively your opponent's characters back to their hand. You can play 4 Your Welcome and 1 Mother Knows Best to achieve the same effect. And since Infinity Weekend is coming up, here's one more example. In Ruby Sapphire lists in the past, players would want 5 3-cost effects that kill small characters, so you can play 4 Brawl and 1 Sisu Daring Visitor. So that's it for reason number 1, in order to preserve certain ratios in your deck. Let's go on to reason number 2, Silver Bullets. What's a Silver Bullet? Well, in card game parlance, it refers to a card that has a very narrow application, likely against only a single archetype, or perhaps a single gameplay situation, and is generally useless in other cases. And in that one situation, however, playing it will often be extremely strong, perhaps even winning the game. So going back to that earlier Sapphire Emerald list, we can see it plays a one-off Bend to My Will, which is fairly common in such lists. And looking at the card, you can see why it qualifies as a Silver Bullet, right? It's extremely powerful, especially in combination with characters singing Mother Knows Best or You're Welcome. However, the dex is good against its limited. Essentially limited to the Mirror Match, sometimes Blurple, maybe sometimes Sapphire Steel. Against anything aggressive like dogs or maybe Purple Steel, it's completely worthless. Even in the matchups where it's good, there are many board positions where Bend is pretty bad to draw, because it doesn't impact the board when it's played and it's also not inkable. So you just play a single copy to find should you need it. Here's another set of examples from the Sapphire Steel list that we looked at earlier. First card I want to talk about is Pluto, which is in the deck to, I imagine, help with the Dogs matchup, specifically the card Emerald Chromicon. You can play Pluto early, Dogs doesn't really have much in the way of removal to answer it, and then you can deal with the Chromicons that way. However, aside from dealing with Emerald Chromicon, Pluto really doesn't bring that much to the table, just as a 5-cost 5/5 quest for 2 that occasionally gains some lore, occasionally blows up a value item like a Woodchuck guidebook from a Blurple opponent, so you just play it as a one-off Silver Bullet. The second Silver Bullet in this list is Arthur King Victorious, which is again a very powerful card in the correct situation where the opponent has an important character you want to challenge, like say a Clarabelle, but your opponent just doesn't expose the Clarabelle by exerting it. You can play Arthur, give another fighting character like Tinkerbell Arthur's effect, and take out the ready Clarabelle. It's also good in board stall situations where you can use Arthur's effect to get in some good value trades. However, Arthur's only good when you have other good high static characters on board, and it's not good when you have no board presence at all, so it's not something you want to see too many copies of. It's also uninkable. So again, a Silver Bullet one-off to be played at the right place at the right time. Silver Bullets, when unexpected, can be extremely powerful and often game-winning. Even if they are expected, they could also have a great effect as well. Say for example, in open decklist tournaments, your opponent reviews your decklist and they see, oh, you have this single copy of a card that's amazing against me. They might, in certain situations in game later, play around it even though you don't have it because, you only play a single copy. So creating any kind of uncertainty in your opponent increases their mental load, which is always good. However, do exercise this in moderation. If you play, 6 to 10 different silver bullets that are great in specific situations but are horrible in most other cases, then you're just diluting your deck too much and forsaking way too much consistency. Silver bullets are also much better in decks that get to see a lot of cards, primarily Sapphire decks, because you're playing one copy of a card. If you just draw one card a turn or see one card a turn, you're very unlikely to find it. In Sapphire, you get to play Sail the Azurite Sea to draw an extra card a turn. You get to play Visions of the Future? Develop Your Brain, Cinderella. Okay, I'm gonna stop naming busted Sapphire cards, you get the idea. In decks that get to see a lot of cards, value of playing silver bullets increases significantly, and the converse is true for decks that don't see a lot of cards. It's also ideal if your silver bullet is inkable, so that in matchups where it's not useful or in situations where it's bad, you can just ink it away. Unfortunately, it seems like most of the high-powered, high-leverage cards in Lorcana are uninkable, so you may not necessarily have a choice in this regard. An inkable silver bullet that has interested me recently is Sword of Hercules. Where it's relevant, you can very efficiently deal with an opponent's Hades, either of them, or maybe even a Sisu. Not to forget Hercules as well, which is getting popular in Ruby Amethyst lists, which specifically is a card that Purple Steel struggles against. But where it's bad, either because your opponent doesn't play those cards or because playing Sword of Hercules will not advance your game state over doing other more valuable things, then you can always just use it as ink. I think this card might be picking up steam with Purple Steel becoming popular and also Hades becoming very popular, so just something to consider. If your silver bullet is not inkable, then unfortunately you might be stuck with it as a dead card in your hand in a lot of your games. But that's where getting some card filtering into your deck might help. So for example, if you're playing a deck with Cinderella or Mulan or Bobby Zimmerski where you get to discard unwanted cards, then that might incentivize you to play some uninkable cards as silver bullets as well. Alright, so that's reason number 2, silver bullets, done and dusted. Now let's go to the third and final reason I'll be discussing, optionality. I know it sounds pretty basic and most players understand intuitively that having options is good. But let's put some words on it to try and express this concept clearly, because I think optionality in Lorcana matters a lot given how the inking system works. So we know in Lorcana, we generally want to ink every turn, at least until turn 5 or 6. And we also want to spend our ink as much as we can every turn, because that is ink spent towards advancing our game plan to put us closer to winning the game. So when we are approaching the altar of our hand, we always try and set up a good curve. If our deck plays something on turn 1, we try and find a good play that we can do on turn 1, 2, 3, 4 and so forth. Generally, during the altar, you kind of stop at 4. And so in a lot of games, we find ourselves in a situation where we keep a 3-drop in our hand, for example, because we know we need to play something on turn 3. But when we get to turn 3, by that point, we've drawn additional cards and we've drawn the other 3-drop that we play. Then you look at your hand and you see that, I'm going to play one of the 3-drops this turn, but I'm unlikely to play the other one on the following turn, so one of them will go to ink. Which one should I play? Then you pick the one that's better for the board or maybe that matchup, and you ink the other one. So by the natural function of just trying to have a good curve in your deck by playing, 2 different 3-drops, 4 of each, so you have 8 in total, and by the way that we ink, we've effectively created a scenario where we have an option on turn 3, which 3-drop do I play? So to take the illustration further, in a normal, quote-unquote, typical list of a given deck, you're going to have 2, maybe 3 different 3-drop options that you're playing 3 or 4 copies of each. The idea of optionality as a justification for playing one-offs is instead of having only 2 or 3 different options at a certain slot, you allow yourself to go up to 4, 5, 6 different options by playing a bunch of different one-offs for that spot on the curve. By doing this, you give yourself the opportunity of being able to pick the correct card to be played on that turn in a given situation, which allows you to be flexible across different matchups and across different game states. If you've been paying attention, you will realize that this sounds slightly similar to the idea of silver bullets, and optionality is similar, but it's not exactly the same. Because with silver bullets, we're talking about cards that are 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10 in some situations, but 1 out of 2 out of 10 in others. When we're talking about optionality in what cards to play on a certain spot in the curve, we're talking about cards that are between 4 to 7 out of 10 depending on the game state, depending on the matchup. One of the top players now who clearly lives and breathes this concept of optionality as it comes through in his deck building is, once again, Frank Karsten. If you look at his Milwaukee winning deck list, you can see, as we mentioned much earlier in the video, he's playing all sorts of random one-offs which are clearly intended to be used in different situations. So for example, the one-off Madam Mim Tiny Adversary where the board presents itself where it would be useful. He has a copy there. Timothy Q Mouse in games where maybe he's racing for lore a bit more. Jafar if you want sometimes a 2-quester on 3-drop, or you want to get a little tradey, you get to use the Challenger buff. Tinkerbell, where again the board presents itself where it's good, you can shift up into the bigger Tinkerbell and wham bam, destroy the board. Karsten continues to embody this deck building philosophy even into the set 10 meta game with Purple Steel, as you can see from the list on screen which he played at the Utrecht CCQ back in early November. I'm not going to go through every single card, but you can see very similarly it plays a bunch of one-offs that are good in different situations. Just to give some additional Frank Karsten lore, he had mentioned in his interview with Lorcana Villain after his DLC Milwaukee win, which I have linked in the description of this video, that he had brought an Amber Steel deck of all one-offs to a set championships during set 8 just as a send-off to the deck prior to the rotation into Core Constructed. I mean, just look at this list, it's just truly absurd. And even back in his younger days when playing Magic the Gathering, he attended the 2009 World Championships playing a singleton blue-white control list in the extended format against the best players in the world. I mean, just look at this video, look at the deck he played out. He said he did it as an experiment. Honestly, this is just unbelievable. So yeah, this Frank Karsten guy, he loves his one-offs. But getting back to Lorcana, I think Frank Karsten does have a certain point when it comes to optionality and therefore playing some one-offs. Let's hear from the man himself in his interview with Lorcana Villain following his DLC Milwaukee win.
And that is essentially like a balance between consistency and flexibility.
Sure.
Right. So I don't see a jumble of cards. I just see like, okay, I have like 10 1-drops. That's like the number I want to like consistently spend my ink on turn 1 and deploy a character. And then I run 4 copies of what I believe are like the best cards for consistency. But then for like the remaining slots, kind of the curve fillers, if there are cards that are, let's say, equally strong on average across matchups, but they may like have different valuations in different matchups or board states, I just like to split the copies for flexibility, and that's all because of the forgiving mulligan rule and the inking system in Lorcana. It just allows you to like rebuild your deck as the game goes on. Because like any time on turn 1 where you would say ink a Palace Guard to then play a Palace Guard, you are essentially losing out on some potential flexibility. Right? That Palace Guard may be great on turn 1 if the opponent is on, say, Amber Steel and opens with a Mulan, but if you were playing against a deck with a bunch of evasive characters, or if you want to set up for, I don't know, a Dumbo activation on turn 5, I might rather play a Happy on turn 1. This is not a case where like one card is always better or worse than another. Like you're not going to see me, I don't know, like play 3 copies of a 3/3 for 2 and like 2 copies of a 3/2 vanilla for 2 when one card is like strictly better than another. But when there is like value in flexibility and cards are better or worse in different states, with the inking system in Lorcana, I like to have options and just adapt to the game and the matchup with different cards every time.
So optionality might be something you want to consider in your deck building to put in a 1-off or 2, though I would caveat that this logic only makes sense where, firstly, the cards that you are considering to play as 1-offs do have a use case that is likely to come up in the matchups that you're expecting to face, and also is actually markedly better than the prevailing option that you would have played should you not have played the 1-off. If not, you're just making your deck less consistent for very, very little gain. The second caveat is that This logic for optionality makes the most sense where we are playing decks that aim to curve out just with characters and stats, where the cards on the slot, as Frank Carsten says, are fairly close in power level and interchangeable, and it doesn't really matter what we play on curve so long as it responds well to what the opponent is doing. Instead, if we are playing a more combo-centric deck that has very fixed quote-unquote best lines and irreplaceable cards, say for example Emerald Sapphire, then it's not that logical to play that many one-offs because the consistency is important. We want to hit our nut draws and our consistent plays as reliably as possible. So to recap, 3 reasons why you might want to think about adopting more one-offs in your deck building practice. Firstly, to have good ratios. Secondly, in order to play certain silver bullets that would help immensely in certain matchups. And thirdly, to have more options on curve. These 3 reasons for playing one-offs all come with their own counterpoints and drawbacks, which I've already discussed earlier in this video, so please be careful before crowding your deck with 15 different one-offs. Or go ahead and do it, why do I care? So that's it for me today. If there's any other reasons or counterpoints you'd like to discuss about playing one-offs, feel free to drop it in the comments, I'm happy to read it. Otherwise, if you do like this type of content, please do like and subscribe. And that's it from me today. Bye bye.